As I go through these first chapters of my novel, I'm reminded that all first drafts are bad. But I find that for most people, that tends to be a bit of a misnomer. It's not that your first draft is going to be good, but I think too many people get the idea that a bad first draft means that they can basically fix and revise anything they've written. I'm sorry to say this, but there are drafts that, if they are egregiously terrible, they can't be revised. Like that, they have to be completely redone and rewritten, almost as a new, complete story. Often, this is mainly an issue when it comes to structuring. So, I mentioned before, especially when it comes to someone like Pantsers, for example, where you write your story and just go in very, very fresh every day with no real direction, and you just end up getting 300 pages of story written at the very end of this. And what you'll find with your first drafts is that if you approach it this way and you don't have a sense of direction with your story, it's just going to wander aimlessly. You're going to have just a collection of scenes that don't interlink at all to characters whose motivations aren't consistent, and who oftentimes their motivations go opposite of what their intentions are. And just the idea that you can sort of move these things around and make corrections, it's going to be such an overhaul that you're going to basically end up writing a completely new draft. So, from a structural standpoint, yes, your first draft is going to be bad, but a lot of this can be remedied by putting a lot more effort into the first draft from the beginning and focusing more on keeping a certain consistency with your story. Just making sure that you have the, like I said, the basics of just understanding what your character wants and what they desire, and then having a basic sense of plot around this that's consistent with that is going to be what you need. And on the opposite end of that, when I talk about and this is what I tend to talk about a lot, when I mention the idea of being consistent with your prose and being very meticulous about what you're putting on the page, this also plays into that myth of the bad first draft. So I've talked before, basically, and it's the same. It's me kind of rehashing the same thing, which is, even though it's a first draft, what you have on the page is basically what's going to be staying on there the rest of the story. People tend to be very lazy, myself included, where what you see for sentences in your story, they tend to kind of remain there. Yes, you play with the words, you clean it up, you dress it up, maybe you shorten a few sentences, maybe you lengthen a few, maybe you change some words around here and there, but the general shape of your chapters and of your paragraphs really isn't going to change a whole lot. And the reason why is that you've already diagrammed your story with these sentences and with these paragraphs, and you're not going to want to then completely redo them all over and start over. So, again, this goes back to me saying that during the first draft stage, that's when you should be much more meticulous and much more focused about what you're putting down initially. That way, when you go through to revise, it can be a true revision, like an actual taking of what's on the page and improving it, or altering it here and there, rather than doing a complete overhaul, or more commonly, just doing a few touch ups here and there, keeping the issues as they are, and just telling yourself, well, I'm done with this novel, it's ready to go. Because, again, the human psyche loves to take the shortcut. The human psyche loves to take the easiest method out of any situation. And it gets worse as the writing process goes on. Like your resistance basically to this sort of mediocrity it wanes. The further the story goes on, basically, your resolve tends to erode, and you're more likely to start signing off on things and saying, well, there's an issue here, but look, yeah, I'll keep it. I'll let an editor fix it. I'll let the publisher tell me if I get a deal on the story. Your quality tends to diminish as it goes on. I tend to find, at least for myself and from what I've seen of other people. I mean, I'm sure there are some out there that don't fall into this category, but I tend to think for most people that tends to be how the process works. So again, I just me reiterating the same point of, don't think that when you approach writing your first draft that a terrible first draft means you can write basically whatever you want, and as long as the general story gets to be put on the page, you can go back and just redo it and retouch it up later on. That first draft, it's there for you to build off of, not there for you to just get something down on the page and then toss out and redo later. And again, I know I harp on this a ton, but again, I just seeing this now, like looking at my draft now from what I wrote, I can already tell. I mean, just even with my sort of conscious, deliberate way I wrote that first draft, there's still tons of issues to fix, and I can only and I can literally see that and imagine, okay, if I hadn't been so meticulous now with how I put my first draft down, I'd have double, triple, the issues that I'd be having now. So again, as someone that's looking at this from the other side, from the second draft perspective, I can tell you a very deliberate and consciously done first draft is going to be a huge lifesaver for you when you get to the later stage of revisions.